But again, every time a child is born, they have the same odds as every other child, so that the children don't know that a normal child's already been born. That's what I'm saying. So the odds are really not in their favor, but it turned out that way. Okay. Another thing I can tell you about people with dwarfism is when they made the movie The Wizard of Oz, they did a great thing for those little people because they were able to go and meet each other. And, you know, they brought them in from all over the country. They paid for them to come in to be the people in The Wizard of Oz. And that was like the first time that there was a little people convention. And they met each other, and it just really was great for their future and their lives. And I can see why they would feel that way, that they would like to be with somebody who has the same difficulty in life and the same, experiences in life. Anyway, that's only one form of dwarfism. There's another kind called pituitary dwarfism, which is not the same thing. So I just want you to know that not everybody who has dwarfism has the dominant form. Okay, and that's something you might question if you know something about other people's families. Okay. They talk about some other diseases too, but I only want to talk about achondroplasia as our example of an autosomal dominant disorder. Okay. Then they talk about autosomal recessive. Autosomal recessive. And I don't like the one they give you. I think it's not common enough. Okay, I'll tell you some that fall in this category. Sickle cell disease and cystic fibrosis. The two most common serious inherited disorders. This is in white people, this is in African Americans, okay? So these are very common, and they're a single gene, and that gene is recessive, okay? The dominant gene is the one that makes everything normal and okay. So that's an example of autosomal recessive. Another thing that's autosomal recessive is a disease called PKU. And I won't tell you what that stands for, I'll just say it, phenylketonuria. But it's called PKU by everybody. Okay, this is an interesting disease because it is an avoidable type of retardation. It's avoidable. And the only thing you've got to do to avoid it is eat the right food. So there's an amino acid called phenylalanine. And this amino acid builds up in the brains of these children and causes them to be retarded. It's one of the most common reasons for retardation in the world. Once they figured this out, they realized they could do a little blood test on a newborn baby. So they take a little needle and they prick their heel. They put their heel on a little card and they take it off and they do a little chemical test on it. They can tell you within a very short time if the child has PKU or not. This chemical test is required for every baby born in America because we're trying to catch the kids with PKU. It's something like 1 in every 20,000 births in the United States and Europe. That's the places where they're doing the test. Okay?
What types of food?
They have to avoid certain foods. And see, here's the deal with PKU. It's different than these two because it just shows up all of a sudden. Where these have to run in your family, this is a mutation that can happen to anybody. Okay? So the deal is they have to avoid foods with phenylalanine in them, especially during their early years of growth, okay, all the way through to their adulthood, even after that. But anyway, this chemical builds up in the brain and will cause brain damage. Okay, so we know that. So they have to avoid phenylalanine. And those children that are born with that, they give them a special diet to follow. And here's the best example I can give y'all for this. NutraSweet. NutraSweet is 2 amino acids linked together, and one of them is phenylalanine. So it's 2 amino acids linked together, and that's all it is. So those 2 amino acids in your body are separated, and they're no different from any other amino acids in your diet that come from the proteins that you eat. So NutraSweet does not cause any terrible health problems to people who don't have PKU. It's nothing. It's nothing but 2 amino acids, which you need to make proteins. If you have PKU, there's a little note on the side of the bottle. If I look at your Coke bottles or whatever, it says, attention, phenylketonurics. Please avoid this. Don't use NutraSweet because it can cause health problems. So they know, the people who got PKU, they know what they're not supposed to eat. And if they want an artificial sweetener, they would be better off using something like Splenda because it doesn't have any phenylalanine in it. So we know that, and that's something we've learned about autosomal recessive inheritance. There are so many things that are recessive that y'all might have questions about, like albinism, people that have no skin pigment. That's recessive. And you might know some African American people that have albinism. I've taught 3 or 4 of them. They have like real light red hair and real pale skin and blue eyes. But you probably don't know any Caucasian people with albinism because they basically go out at night. And most people who are white that have albinism, they have like an evening job or something because if they get out in the sun, that ultraviolet light, if they have no melanin in their skin, it can kill them. They can get skin cancer from that. So albinism is not uncommon. It's not uncommon, and it is recessive. It's autosomal recessive. Okay, they talk about neurobiological disorders. Okay, talking about these disorders that we know of as depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, obsessive compulsive disorder, even things like ADD and autism that are all brain disorders. We don't know yet what's causing those. We believe it's genetic because it runs in families. They don't know yet what chromosome they're all on. And even within that, there are people that have schizophrenia that the same drugs don't work on them. So there's something different in their brains. People with bipolar, different drugs work for them. If you've ever been diagnosed with depression, you know there's about 20 different drugs. They got to try all of them until one of them works. So they don't really know chemically what the difference is. They can't currently make a blood test and say, you're the one that's got schizophrenia and this is the drug we need. But they're working on that. And eventually they'll be able to help those people. And that's a good thing because, those mental disorders cause all kinds of loss of work and loss of life and just all kinds of productivity problems that we need to do something about. Okay, next, section 11.3. This is one of those things that's one of those things that gets people's attention. We're really big in America about giving attention to something that's fairly rare. So this disorder that they're talking about, 1 in every 8 million humans has this disorder. It's interesting, but we need to concentrate on things that are not quite so rare. We need to spend our money fixing sickle cell and cystic fibrosis. I have sympathy for the people, but, if there's only 15 people in the world that have it, odds are they're not going to work on it real hard because there's not that many people affected by it. But this disorder that they're talking about causes people to age. When they're little children, they're not even 10 years old, they look like old people. They go through early aging. Now, studying these people is a great idea, partly to help them, but also because studying them can help us learn something about what are the genes that lead to aging. Is that the genes that these people have mistakes in? And if so, maybe we can learn something about preventing the aging situation in everyday people. So, it is important to study these, not only to help them, but because more things can be learned just by studying those characteristics. And they have something in America called, I believe it's called the Orphan Drug Program, so that if there's a disease that's very, very rare, the federal government will pay drug companies to try to develop treatments for those diseases. So if you've got something that only 5 people have, there is a program in America to help develop drugs for that, even though it's very rare, which is a great idea. Okay. So section 4, 11.4, is talking about the other things. So this is autosomal. The next section is talking about sex-linked. And they call it something else. They call it X-linked. That's okay with me because most sex-linked disorders are on the X chromosome. But there are genes on the Y chromosome, so let's don't forget that. And you can have disorders that are based on genes on the Y chromosome, especially if you're a man, obviously, because the only one that's got a Y chromosome is a man. But the X-linked is usually the inheritance problem because there are so many genes on the X chromosome. Okay, so let's think about the characteristics here of male versus female. A woman's got 2 X's, and the man has 1 X and 1 Y. When they call something sex-linked or X-linked, when you're writing this down, you actually put the letter for whatever it is over the X chromosome. So here's a couple of things that are X-linked. Hemophilia is X-linked recessive. Color blindness, also X-linked recessive. So hemophilia is something that, y'all probably have no real experience with, but you may know from your previous studies that hemophilia is a problem with the clotting of the blood. A person who's got hemophilia is missing one or more of the clotting factors, so their blood doesn't clot normally. Now, you might think that these people would get a cut and they would bleed to death, but that's not really the problem. The problem is internal bleeding. Okay? So you don't realize it, but as you're walking around or jumping up and down or shaking your head, capillaries are breaking. Little tiny blood vessels are breaking, and they seal right back up again because you've got clotting factor. If you had hemophilia, if you did this, it might cause brain damage as those capillaries in the brain hemorrhaged and bled into the brain. So people who have hemophilia, if they're not treated with clotting factor, which now we can give them, if they're not treated with clotting factor, they usually don't live to adulthood because somewhere along the line they get internal bleeding and it causes them to bleed to death internally. They could also have external injuries, but usually people who got hemophilia are very careful not to hit